This video is about the skeletal system. We'll look at the skeletal system functions and structures, and again, how the skeletal system helps maintain homeostasis. One of the reoccurring themes that we'll look at through this chapter is how the skeletal system is living. And because it's living, it's going to exhibit some of these characteristics of life. A lot of times we think of skeletons in association with dead things, but the skeleton is alive, and we'll see the evidence of that. One of the things that the skeletal system does is support soft tissues. Your muscles attach to it. It also allows movement. Your muscles can pull on it. The bones form levers so that we can have this range of motion. The skeletal system protects a lot of internal organs, including your heart and brain. The skeletal system stores minerals like calcium and phosphorus. It also stores fat, which is why your relatives, maybe a grandmother, taught you to put a ham bone in the green beans. And it's because the fat in that bone flavors the green beans as opposed to a pat of butter. And bone also makes red blood cells. So red bone marrow makes red blood cells. Yellow bone marrow stores fat. Adults have 206 bones. Infants have more. So what happens? As an infant grows up, does it lose its bones? The answer is no. The bones just fuse together. Where you once had two, you now have one. There's a significant difference between the skeletal structure of males and females. Male skeletons tend to have a higher bone density. They're also larger bones. And then there's some specific bone traits that are unique to males and females. For example, males have a more angular jaw, whereas females have a more U-shaped jaw. The male pelvis is very distinct from a female pelvis. The subpubic angle in a male is acute, whereas the subpubic angle in a female is much wider. This opening in the female is much wider than this opening in the male. So those are significant differences between male and female skeletons. So as a forensic scientist, you find a skeleton, you'll be able to determine if it's male or female. Some parts of bone are spongy bone. Other parts of bone are compact. Spongy bone is typically the inside, the inner parts of the bone, whereas the more superficial parts of the bone, the outer surfaces, are more compact bone. Most bone is covered with a layer of periosteum. Periosteum is where you have the nerves and the blood vessels that run along the outside of the bone. Here's a picture of some bone. The epiphysis is the end of the bone. Sometimes we refer to it as the growth plate because that's where the growth plate is located. The diaphysis is the shaft of the bone. Periosteum is like a wrap that goes around the bone. Compact bone is typically on the outer parts of the bone, whereas spongy bone is typically in the center that runs along the more deep parts of the bone. Here's a great example of spongy bone. The reason we know it's spongy is because there's a lot of openings or pores in the bone. Bones are made up of osteons. Osteons are kind of the functional unit of bones. And osteons consist of concentric rings of osteocytes. Osteon means bone. Cyte means cell. So osteocytes form concentric rings. Those rings make up bones. In between those bone cells is matrix. So remember, bone is connective tissue. So we've got cells surrounded by matrix, this kind of protein matrix. The space that the bone cell occupies is called the lacuna. So those are like spaces. Osteocytes are mature bone cells. And then running right down the center of this osteon is a Haversian canal, an opening where nerves and blood vessels are located. There's three major types of bone cells. Osteocytes are mature bone cells. Osteoclasts have the job of breaking down bone, releasing calcium. Osteoblasts are the builders. So think of it as clast, chompers, blast, builders. Osteoblasts rebuild and replace bone. Remember that bone is living, so it's made of cells, just like all living things, but it also has these chemical reactions, metabolic processes. One of those processes is absorbing calcium and phosphorus. So bones store calcium and phosphorus. Bones also consist of a matrix that's composed mostly of collagen. So collagen makes bones flexible, whereas phosphorus and calcium makes bones brittle. So bones are both strong because of the calcium, but flexible because of the collagen. If you could dissolve the calcium by soaking bones in vinegar, you'll find they're kind of rubbery. If you could break down the protein collagen by baking bones in an oven overnight, well then you'll find they're brittle like chalk. Here's an example of osteoporosis. So the osteoblasts aren't keeping up with the osteoclasts. So the chompers are breaking down bone, but the builders aren't repairing it fast enough. And a lot of that has to do with the lack of calcium reabsorption. This is a problem that's more common among older women, especially once they hit menopause. Their estrogen production falls, estrogen aids in calcium reabsorption, and so their bones become more brittle and more porous. Bones grow, living things grow. So as an individual develops, their bones change. They become less cartilaginous, a lot less cartilage in composition, and a lot more ossified, more osteocytes. So they're harder, firm in composition. Then the length of bones change. As we grow, our bones lengthen, and they lengthen from the epiphyseal plate up. And then bones get thicker, especially as we induce more exercise stress. But with age, into adulthood, our bones get thicker. Here's an example of how bones grow. You'll notice little specks there. That's where it's mostly cartilaginous. It becomes more ossified. That center cavity begins to widen, and then that dense bone starts to form on the outer layers. A is pointing to the epiphyseal plate, the growth plate, and bones grow from that point out. If a doctor were to autograph your bone when you were a child, that autograph will stay in that same basic location because bones are growing from the plates outward. You can see the difference between an infant skeleton and an adult one. One, of course, is that it's much smaller in size. The other major indication is the amount of cartilage. As we go through developmental stages, our bones have less and less cartilage. So a 12-year-old will have significantly less or more cartilage than a 85-year-old, which will have no cartilage. And then, of course, infant skeletons have more bones. One point of note is the skull. You'll notice this large amount of cartilage right in the center of the skull of the infant skeleton. Those are called fontanelles, those cartilage plates. And what it does is it allows the skull bone to kind of compress like a cone during the birthing process so that the baby's head can fit through the birth canal. Bones maintain homeostasis, so they repair when they're broken. If they're stressed with exercise, they respond by getting thicker. And hormones can help regulate some of those functions. Calcitonin is a hormone that causes bones to absorb more calcium. Parathyroid hormone is a hormone that causes bones to release calcium. Human growth hormone stimulates bone growth, especially in length. Estrogen stimulates calcium absorption, especially in women. The axial skeleton consists of the head, neck, and trunk. So bones that are part of the head, neck, and trunk are axial. Bones that are part of the appendages, arms, legs, and their attachments are appendicular. So for example, the humerus, the bone in your upper arm, is appendicular. So is the clavicle, because that's how your arm attaches. But your frontal bone, that is axial. There are several different types of joints. Fibrous joints, the bones are connected flush together. Cartilaginous joints means that there's a sandwich of cartilage in between the bones. And then synovial joints are freely movable joints. Fibrous joints you would find mostly in your skull, cartilaginous joints in your spine, Synovial joints are your freely movable ones. Things like a hinge joint, that would be your elbow. It kind of swings like a hinge. Ball and socket would be your shoulder, because you can rotate it a ball part in a socket. We have different types of joint movement. Flexion means that we're bending at the joint and we're narrowing the angle of the joint. Extension means that we're widening that angle. So if you think about your arm, flexing and extending. Circumduction means that we're moving it in a circle. So we can do that with our shoulder or our hip. Supination means we're making it face up as opposed to pronation, which is face down. So think of it like a bowl of soup or supine, face up, or laying prone, face down. Adduction, we're moving the appendage closer to our body. We're adding it to our body. Abduction, like abducted by aliens, we're taking the appendage and moving it away from our body. Rotation just means we're turning it from side to side. Sometimes joints can be injured by sprains. So for example, hyperextending, where we've extended the joint and then we've gone beyond the normal range of motion. Sprains affect the ligaments of joints, the connective tissue that's holding the joints together. Bursitis, the ITIS tells me there's an inflammation of the bursa. That's a cushion sac in joints like your knee and elbow. Osteoarthritis is an arthritis that is caused by overuse. So for example, a pitcher might get arthritis in their elbow or their shoulder. Rheumatoid arthritis is autoimmune. So we would notice rheumatoid arthritis in both shoulder joints, not just the one that's overused. Here's an example of a fibrous joint holding the skull bones together. Here's an example of rheumatoid arthritis, because we'll notice that all the joints are swollen. Here's an example of osteoarthritis. It's only in the big toe. Like only the big toe joint has the inflammation. I hope that helps you understand a little better about the skeleton, its structures, functions, and disorders.